Can Russia's military sustain its might amidst economic turmoil? Welcome to African Post. In today's video, we'll explore how Russia's economic mismanagement under Putin, particularly the focus on a war-driven economy, is leading to both military and national decline. While initial sanctions hit hard, Russia's attempt to bounce back by prioritizing military spending is proving unsustainable. We'll dive into the risks of this strategy, which could strain resources, degrade the economy, and potentially lead to a collapse of both Russia's military and its stability. Stay tuned as we break down this critical issue. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 sent shockwaves across the world. Under President Vladimir Putin, Russia's economic and military ambitions have become increasingly intertwined. However, this aggressive strategy has come at a steep cost. The war in Ukraine has exposed the fragility of Russia's economy and raised serious questions about the long-term sustainability of its military ambitions. The invasion of Ukraine has united the West against Russia, leading to crippling sanctions and isolating Russia from the global economy. The economic pressure on Russia is immense, and its ability to sustain its military operations in Ukraine is increasingly in doubt. The situation presents a stark warning about the perils of prioritizing military might over economic stability. This is not just a story of tanks and troops. It's a story of economic miscalculation, political hubris, and the human cost of war. You need to hear this if you're a follower of global politics. Putin's invasion of Ukraine was predicated on a swift and decisive victory. He grossly underestimated Ukrainian resistance and the resolve of the West to support Ukraine. The result has been a protracted conflict that has drained Russia's resources and exposed the limitations of its military. The economic consequences for Russia have been severe. International sanctions imposed on Russia in response to the invasion have crippled its economy. Key sectors, including finance, energy, and technology, have been targeted, cutting Russia off from global markets and essential technologies. The Russian ruble plummeted in value, inflation soared, and the country plunged into recession. The economic pain inflicted by these sanctions has been significant, undermining Putin's ability to finance the war effort and maintain domestic stability. Putin's miscalculation has had profound consequences for the Russian people. The economic hardship caused by the war and sanctions has led to a decline in living standards. The human cost of Putin's war is mounting, both in Ukraine and within Russia itself. Despite the economic turmoil, Russia has continued to invest heavily in its military. The defense industry has been a rare bright spot in the Russian economy, experiencing growth and receiving significant government support. This has allowed Russia to maintain a large and modernized military force, capable of projecting power both regionally and globally. However, this military strength masks underlying economic weaknesses. Experts warn that Russia's military-industrial complex is unsustainable in the long term. The sanctions have restricted Russia's access to critical technologies and components, forcing it to rely on outdated equipment and indigenous production. This dependence on older technology and the inability to access cutting-edge advancements could erode Russia's military capabilities over time. Moreover, the focus on military spending comes at the expense of other crucial sectors, such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The quality of life for ordinary Russians is declining, and the gap between the rich and poor is widening. The longer the war in Ukraine drags on, the more apparent these economic cracks will become. Putin's economic strategy increasingly resembles the Soviet Union's approach, prioritizing military spending and central control over market forces. This command and control model has proven ineffective in the past, leading to stagnation, shortages, and ultimately economic collapse. The Soviet Union's overemphasis on heavy industry and military production came at the expense of consumer goods and technological innovation. This led to chronic shortages, stifled economic growth, and ultimately contributed to the Soviet Union's demise. Putin's Russia appears to be repeating these mistakes, focusing on maintaining a vast military apparatus while neglecting the needs of its citizens and the long-term health of its economy. Modern economies are driven by innovation, technological advancement, and global interconnectedness. Limited access to consumer goods, rising prices, and declining living standards are breeding discontent and undermining support for Putin's regime. History teaches us that economic hardship can be a powerful catalyst for social and political upheaval. Will strained resources force a shift in Russia's military priorities? The price of militarization, strained resources, and shifting priorities. The immense cost of the war in Ukraine has placed an enormous strain on Russia's resources. The Kremlin has been forced to divert funding from essential services and social programs to finance the military campaign, further exacerbating existing social and economic problems. This prioritization of military spending over the well-being of its citizens is unsustainable and could have dire consequences for Russia's future. The dismissal of Sergei Shoigu, Russia's long-serving defense minister, is a telling sign of the internal pressures created by the war. Shoigu's removal suggests a potential power struggle within the Kremlin and growing concerns about the military's performance in Ukraine. It also highlights the high stakes involved in maintaining the facade of military strength, even as the economic realities of the war become increasingly difficult to ignore. The strain on Russia's resources is evident in the declining quality of its military equipment. Reports suggest that Russia is increasingly reliant on older, less sophisticated weaponry, as sanctions restrict its access to advanced technology and components. The fragility of Russia's military power. While Russia possesses a formidable military force on paper, its true capabilities are increasingly in question. The war in Ukraine has exposed weaknesses in Russia's military doctrine, training, and equipment. Moreover, the economic realities facing Russia threaten to undermine its military strength in the long run, potentially leaving it vulnerable to both internal and external challenges. The sanctions imposed on Russia have severely limited its access to advanced technology, including semiconductors and microelectronics, which are essential for modern military equipment. This technological disadvantage will become increasingly pronounced over time, as Russia struggles to maintain and modernize its arsenal without access to Western components and expertise. Moreover, the economic strain caused by the war and sanctions will likely force Russia to make difficult choices regarding its military spending. Maintaining a vast military apparatus will become increasingly challenging as Russia grapples with a shrinking economy and mounting social needs. The Kremlin has gone to great lengths to control the narrative surrounding the war in Ukraine and its economic consequences. State-controlled media outlets bombard the Russian populace with propaganda, downplaying the severity of the situation and portraying Russia as a victim of Western aggression. However, the limits of this propaganda machine are becoming increasingly apparent as ordinary Russians grapple with the realities of economic hardship. Despite the Kremlin's efforts to stifle dissent, protests against the war and the deteriorating economic situation have erupted across Russia. While these protests have been met with swift and brutal repression, they are a testament to the growing discontent among the Russian people. The economic costs of Putin's war are impossible to ignore, even in the face of relentless propaganda. The internet and social media have played a crucial role in circumventing state censorship and providing alternative sources of information to the Russian people. Through these channels, Russians are able to access independent news outlets, connect with like-minded individuals, and organize protests. Russia's current economic woes are not an isolated incident, but rather a recurring theme in its history. From the Tsarist era to the Soviet period and now under Putin, Russia has been plagued by economic mismanagement, corruption, and a failure to diversify its economy. This pattern of boom and bust cycles has hindered Russia's development and left it vulnerable to external shocks. During the Tsarist era, Russia's economy was heavily reliant on agriculture and natural resources. This dependence on raw materials made it vulnerable to fluctuations in global commodity prices and hindered industrial development. The Tsarist regime's failure to implement meaningful economic reforms contributed to widespread poverty and social unrest, ultimately leading to the Russian Revolution of 1917. The Soviet Union, despite its initial promises of economic equality and progress, ultimately followed a similar path. The centrally planned economy, while successful in achieving rapid industrialization, proved inefficient and unsustainable in the long run. Russia's economic instability has far-reaching consequences that extend beyond its borders. As a major energy exporter and a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, Russia's actions have significant geopolitical and economic implications. The war in Ukraine and the ensuing sanctions have disrupted global supply chains, fueled inflation, and exacerbated food insecurity, particularly in developing countries. The sanctions imposed on Russia have sent shockwaves through the global economy. Russia is a major supplier of oil, natural gas, wheat, and other commodities. The disruption to these exports has led to higher energy prices, increased food costs, and supply chain disruptions across various industries. The economic fallout from the war in Ukraine is being felt worldwide, particularly in countries that are heavily reliant on Russian exports. Moreover, Russia's actions have raised concerns about the future of the rules-based international order. The invasion of Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law and has undermined the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Russia, under President Vladimir Putin, finds itself at a crossroads. The invasion of Ukraine, while intended to restore Russia to its former glory, has instead exposed the country's deep-seated economic and military vulnerabilities. The combination of economic mismanagement, international sanctions, and a costly war has placed immense strain on Russia's resources, threatening its long-term stability and its standing in the world. Putin's economic policies, mirroring the mistakes of the Soviet Union, have prioritized military might over the well-being of the Russian people. The consequences of this approach are becoming increasingly apparent as ordinary Russians grapple with declining living standards, limited access to essential goods and services, and a shrinking economy. The facade of strength and stability carefully constructed by the Kremlin is crumbling, revealing a system that is unsustainable and increasingly vulnerable to internal and external pressures. The war in Ukraine has not only devastated Ukraine but has also set Russia on a dangerous path. The economic costs of the war, coupled with international isolation and the growing discontent among the Russian population, threaten to unravel the very fabric of Putin's regime.